Hello and welcome back for another Sheriff of Sodium video. Well, Friday was match day, and now the envelopes have all been opened. Everyone's fate, at least for the next 3 to 7 years, has been determined. Tears, hopefully of joy, have been shed, and just like that, another match day is in the books. And you know what that means. Yeah, that's right. It's time to break it down, winners and losers style. Our first loser for the 2023 match is emergency medicine programs. That's been the biggest story over the past week is the number of unfilled positions in emergency medicine. Actually, only 82% of EM positions filled, which is the lowest of all the major specialties with the exception of radiation oncology that only filled 81% of their positions. What makes this so notable, of course, is the fact that the number of EM positions that are available in the SOAP has skyrocketed over the past couple of years. In fact, this year, with 554 unfilled positions, there were more emergency medicine positions available in the SOAP this year than there have been in the previous 15 years combined. Now, look, this is only a surprise to you if you haven't been paying attention. And viewers of this channel will know that I had a video about this in the fall after the ERS preliminary data came out. But that still hasn't kept certain media outlets who are not in the habit of following the Sheriff of Sodium from covering this story like it's some kind of moral panic. Look, there's definitely a conversation to be had about the future of emergency medicine, but in the first place, I'm not the person to lead that. I'm not an emergency medicine doctor. I'm just a guy who follows the match statistics and medical education. But I will say this, as you have that conversation about the future of EM, I hope everybody remembers that the number of unfilled positions is a very poor surrogate for anything that you really care about. In fact, I'm going to give you a bold prediction for next year. My bet is that the number of unfilled emergency medicine positions will actually decrease in 2024, even though I'll bet we'll see a further decrease in the number of US, MD, and DO students who want to go into emergency medicine. But what's going to happen is that emergency medicine programs are going to adjust their recruiting strategy, and international medical graduate applicants are going to respond to this changing landscape by applying to EM in greater numbers. So, in other words, I think you're going to see a decline in the number of unfilled positions, even though there won't be any fundamental difference in the experience of being an emergency medicine physician. And heck, while I'm at it and I'm in the predicting mood, I'm going to go ahead and give you another bold prediction for 2024. You heard it here first. The SOAP crisis that's now infecting emergency medicine is going to spread to pediatrics next year. The number of applicants to pediatric residency programs has been in decline in recent years, even as the number of programs continues to expand. And I think a lot of pediatric program directors aren't yet paying attention. So my bet is that next year we'll reach a tipping point and the number of unfilled pediatric positions will be, let's say, over 200. Just remember, you heard it here first. Moving on to a match day winner, diagnostic radiology programs. Many EM program directors want to know, where do their applicants go? And based on nothing more than the application and match data, I think the likely answer seems to be, for many of them at least, diagnostic radiology. This year, every single one of the 1,176 diagnostic radiology positions offered in the match filled, every single one. The only other specialties to fill 100% of their positions were orthopedic, plastic, and thoracic surgery, and those are smaller specialties than diagnostic radiology. Another loser in this year's match, family medicine. It was another lean year for many family medicine programs. Overall, only 88.7% of family medicine positions filled, which left 577 positions available in the SOAP. That's 23 more than we had available in emergency medicine. In fact, just 29% of the available family medicine positions were filled by graduating USMD students. That's the blue bar here. That's the lowest of any specialty. There's another 30% of positions that were filled by graduating DO students, but that still means that US medical schools produce only enough students to fill a little more than half of the available family medicine residency positions. Our next winner, data misinterpretation. Look, this happens every year. Within minutes of the release of the NRMP's advanced data tables, I start to see chatter on social media saying that such and such specialty has some shockingly low match rate. So this year, for sake of example, I saw people claiming that the 2023 match had a 69% match rate for MD seniors who were trying to get into anesthesiology, and a 72% match rate for the same group trying to get into general surgery. Oh, folks, the problem is that the NRMP's advanced data tables and main match reports, they don't distinguish applicants who really want to match in that specialty from applicants who are applying to that specialty as a backup. So to use anesthesiology for an example, it's true. There were 1,741 MD seniors who applied to PGY1 anesthesiology positions. And it's true that only 1,199 of them matched, and it's further true that 1,199 divided by 1,741 is 69%. But here's what you don't know. We don't know how many of the applicants who didn't match into anesthesiology because they actually matched into a more preferred specialty and they just applied to anesthesiology programs as a backup. What we really need to get the real match rates, we need to know an applicant's preferred specialty. We need to know the specialty that they were really trying to get into. And the only NRMP data that gives us that are the charting outcomes in the match reports. Now, if you're interested, you can look at the match rates from last year. These came out in 2022, and you can see how the match rates vary by different applicant groups and different specialties. Now, having said that, I will tell you that there aren't many applicants who are bold enough to apply to the ultra competitive specialties, things like orthopedics or plastic surgery or otolaryngology. You don't see many people who apply to those as backups. So you can use the initial data from the NRMP to estimate the match rates that you're going to see in charting outcomes, and they're going to be pretty close to what you're going to see in those documents. So for those specialties, orthopedics was at 73%, plastics at 75%, otolaryngology at 82%. I think those are credible estimates of what we're going to see when charting outcomes comes out. There's some other variations of data misinterpretation that are even more bizarre. Here's one example. On Twitter, the National Board of Osteopathic Medical Examiners celebrated improvements in DO senior match rates with this tweet here. And I truly have no clue how they calculated these figures to 2 decimal place precision, no less. I replied to them on Twitter, but naturally they declined to provide any explanation. But I'll simply note this. The match rate for DO seniors who preferred to match into child neurology last year was 89.5%. So if this figure is true, that it went up by 25%, well, folks, we got a match rate that's over 100%. And that doesn't make a lick of sense. Our next winner, match rates. Even though we don't know specialty-specific match rates, we do know the overall match rates. And at 81.1% for all applicants submitting a rank order list, this was the highest match rate in the modern era. That's the dashed gray line that I'm showing you there. In fact, there were a couple other records that were set this year. The match rate for graduating DO students hit 91.6%, which is an all-time record. The match rate for U.S. citizen international medical graduates, that's the green line you see here, also hit an all-time high at 67.6%. Meanwhile, USMD seniors, you can see that light blue line, their match rate has been pretty stable over time. 93.7% of graduating USMD students matched successfully. And that's actually represents a little bit of a rebound from COVID-19. Our next loser, non-US citizen international medical graduates. Not all applicant groups saw record-setting match rates, though. Non-US citizen international medical graduates matched at a 59% rate, which is up only slightly from last year's 58%. What's interesting here is the separation in outcomes between U.S. international medical graduates, that's the green line on this graph, and non-U.S. citizen international medical graduates, that's the yellow line. As you can see, through most recent years, match rates for those two groups are pretty close to each other. But this year, we saw a significant increase in U.S. international medical graduate match rates, while non-U.S. citizen match rates stayed pretty flat. The explanation for this is probably related to the specialties that these groups tend to target. Now, both U.S. citizen and non-U.S. citizen IMGs commonly match into positions in internal medicine or family medicine. But there are relatively more U.S. IMGs who target positions in emergency medicine and psychiatry. And those two specialties were a little less competitive this year than they have been in recent application cycles. On the other hand, there are relatively more non-US citizen IMGs who apply in neurology and pathology, and those specialties proved to be surprisingly competitive. In fact, both neurology and pathology had program fill rates of over 99%. Our next loser is couples. Couples are another group that didn't fare quite as well in 2023 match as they have in previous years. Overall, they had a match rate of 93%, which is down slightly from the 95 plus percent range that couples were matching at between 2016 and 2020. Now, look, 93% doesn't sound too bad, but there's something about the couples match rate that you need to understand. Many couples submit rank order lists in which one partner is going unmatched. That's a preference that they may list after they've listed all the permutations of both partners matching. But if you submit a pairing like that and the algorithm assigns it to you, well, you got something that you said you were willing to take, and so it gets recorded as a successful match in the data book, even though it probably doesn't feel that way. So if you take away that group, the couples match rate's only 88%. Only 88% of couples received a pairing in which both partners got a residency placement. Our next winner, match rate fibs. Because now that match day is over, we can all look forward to a series of self-congratulatory press releases from medical schools, celebrating their students' match success and citing match rates of 98 to 100% for their students. Now, the funny thing about this, though, is that, like I showed you, even USMD seniors only have a collective match rate of, 93, 94%. So how is it that every medical school seems to have a 100% match rate? This is even more striking with osteopathic medical schools because they're required as a condition of accreditation to publish their match rate. And I'll link in the show notes to a web page that has helpfully collected the published match rates from all the osteopathic medical schools. So you may be surprised to learn that although the NRMP records a match rate of around 91% for DO seniors, every single osteopathic medical school, except for one, claims a match rate of 98 to 100%. In reality, what's going on is that most medical schools conflate their match rate, meaning the proportion of students who are assigned a residency position in the match, with their placement rate, which includes students who went unmatched but managed to get into an unfilled position after the match was over. Now, from the school standpoint, you can argue, well, this distinction maybe doesn't matter. I mean, we have the SOAP for a reason, right? I mean, the student's got a residency position at the end of the day, right? But, for a student who misses the chance to train in their dream specialty, and instead they've got to scour the limited offerings in SOAP and maybe scramble into some 1 year preliminary position, and along with it, the uncertainty of trying to match again in a year, well, that distinction is a big deal. The other trick that schools use is they reclassify students into the following class. So let's say you didn't match. Well, instead of owning up to the fact that you tried to match into a specialty and you didn't have the outcome that you wanted, you get reclassified into the following year's graduating class. And the schools will assert, well, our match rate only applies to our graduating students, and these students aren't graduating. All I can say is that I wish that the LCME would make this a requirement for accreditation for MD schools to report authentic, legitimate match data. And I wish that COCA would actually enforce the standard that applies to osteopathic medical students, because students deserve this data when you're choosing your schools. And if you're a pre-med who happens to be listening to this video and you're looking at statistics like that, all I can say is buyer beware. Our next loser, the residency positions aren't growing reply guys. Because, for as long as I've been talking about stuff in this space, I've sort of followed with curiosity a vocal and diverse group who claim, despite evidence to the contrary, that the number of residency positions isn't growing, or at least it's not growing as fast as medical graduates. Usually the people who say this are just people, and it may be self-serving, and they want people to believe this because it would sort of justify some policy initiative that they want. And I don't necessarily hold it against people like that, although I wish that they would inform themselves about the real numbers a little bit more before they start popping off about it. But I'll tell you, a lot of this misinformation, it comes from places that absolutely, with certainty, should know better. Here, for example, is a screenshot from an official AAMC video where we've got this sad-looking cartoon doctor as he's looking at this growing number of medical school graduates, and the voiceover says, "You've probably heard that residency positions aren't growing at the same rate as graduating medical students." Well, wherever might I have heard that from, AMC? Perhaps from you? Well, don't worry, little cartoon doctor dude. It's not true. I mean, it is true that if you take all comers, there are more residency applicants than there are residency positions. That's true. But there's really no evidence that that disparity is widening. And in fact, this year's NRMP data suggests that it's actually closed a little bit. What I'm showing you here in this graph, the blue number shows active applicants in the NRMP match. The red number shows the number of PGY1 positions that are available. There's no one who can look at that graph and say the number of PGY1 positions is not growing. If you say that, buddy, I don't know what to tell you. You need to learn how to read a graph. And notice that the difference between the red and the blue lines has really been pretty stable. They've really moved up in parallel with each other. And this year you can see, because the blue line is flattened off a bit, there's actually a little bit of closure. So that between 2004 and 2022, if you take the ratio of active applicants to positions in the match, that number ranged from 1.17 applicants to position to 1.34 applicants per position. This year, there were actually 1.15 active applicants for every PGY1 position, which is the most favorable ratio in the past 2 decades. Our next loser, the unmatched. Because look, we got to be honest about this. Even with a record-setting overall match rate, and even with growth in the number of residency positions, there's still a lot of applicants who went home empty-handed on match day. In fact, there were 8,130 applicants who submitted a rank order list and didn't match to any PGY1 position. There were another 3,049 applicants who never even submitted a rank order list, probably because they received too few interview offers to even rank programs. But they stuck around and stayed in the match because they wanted to participate in the SOAP. Our next loser, USMLE Step 1 apologists. Because this year was the first year that many residency applicants applied without a scored USMLE Step 1. Before that test moved to pass-fail scoring in January of 2022, I'll tell you, I heard some dire warnings from the Step 1 apologists questioning how competitive specialties were ever going to choose their applicants without having a 3-digit measure of basic science acumen to guide them. And yet somehow, some way, USMLE Step 2, competitive residency programs managed to find applicants and fill their programs. Our next winner is the Electronic Residency Application Service, or ERAS. Because unlike in previous years, ERAS managed to make it through SOAP Week without crashing or suffering prolonged downtime. I think if you had to use ERAS during SOAP Week, you might want to pour one out for your homies who spent $116.7 million on ERAS fees in 2021, because apparently that got a little bit of system upgrades that benefited us all this year. Our next winner, preference signaling. Although certain specialties like otolaryngology have used preference signaling for several years, the 2022-2023 season was the first year that almost all specialties allowed applicants to send a limited number of signals to their favorite programs before their application got reviewed. Anecdotally, this expansion of preference signaling seems to have gone well. I'm sure there's numerous papers describing signaling in different specialties forthcoming, but in the meantime, the best data that we have still come from the otolaryngology experience, which has really been pretty favorable. In that highly competitive specialty, at least, signaling leads to a better distribution of interview offers. There's slightly fewer offers for the top applicants, but more for everybody else. And preference signaling does not seem to disadvantage women or minority groups. Our next loser, preference signaling gamers. Many applicants don't realize this, but on match day, program directors get a full report from the NRMP that lists their entire rank order list, and it shows where all the applicants that they ranked ultimately matched. So yeah, if you sent a love note to a program saying you were going to rank them number 1, but then you didn't and you were actually ranked to match, well, the program will know that, and they'll get to see who you ranked over them because they'll know where you're going eventually. So I mean, if this happens every year, and all I can say is you may just want to avoid that program when you submit your fellowship applications here in a few years. But that's kind of expected. I think programs expect that kind of stuff, and of course, programs lie to applicants too and tell them they're ranked to match, and applicants don't get any information from the NRMP telling them where they were ranked by programs. But this year, there's actually been a little bit of an additional surprise because some program directors have been surprised to see that some of their preferred applicants, they didn't just match at another program, but they matched in other specialties altogether, even though that applicant had sent them a signal of interest. And the issue here, of course, is that in this giant rat race of residency selection, some applicants have realized that they could gain advantage over others by applying to multiple specialties and tapping into the preference signaling system for each specialty. So let's take, for example, an applicant who dreams of becoming a surgeon. So she applies to 100 general surgery programs and she gets 5 signals. And so she signals her 5 favorite general surgery programs. But she really wants to be sure that she's going to match and she's not sure if she will. So she applies to some anesthesiology programs as a backup. And she gets 5 signals to send to them too. So when the anesthesiology program director receives that signal of interest, they're very likely to give her an interview. And based on that signal that they got with the application, they probably would reason that, well, gosh, our program must be in her top 5. And in reality, they're not even in the top 100. So as more program directors puzzle over their match results, I think what they're going to do is they're going to call upon ARIS to eliminate this opportunity for gamesmanship. And I hope actually that next year ARIS will require applicants to select a preferred specialty, and you'll only be able to send preference signals in that specialty only. Our final winner, non-first choice matchers. For some applicants, the joy of match day was tempered by opening their envelope and seeing a placement wasn't what they'd hoped for. It can feel like a gut punch. In fact, I've heard from a couple of applicants who question the very tradition of having public match day ceremonies because, it really puts you on the spot to see something that's not what you wanted when you're amidst the joy of all your classmates and you have to smile. I mean, it can be a difficult situation. So it may help to know that, you're not alone. I mean, even though overall match rates are high, there's been a slow and steady decline in the proportion of graduating MD students who get their first choice in the match. This is an article from New England Journal of Medicine last year. You can see the blue line shows the proportion of applicants who get their first choice match, which has declined slowly and steadily from the early 2000s when around 60% of USMDs got their first choice program, and it's down to the low 40% range now. It may also help to know that ultimately it may not matter. This is an interesting paper where they surveyed some medical students on measures of happiness, excitement, stress, and life satisfaction. They surveyed on match day, and you can see the results here on the left panel. The happiest students, the least stressed students, they were all the ones who had matched to their first choice programs. And the people who matched their second choice, they were happier and less stressed than the third and fourth choice matchers. But if you survey those students again by mid-October, they're actually indistinguishable. Ultimately, your residency and your career are going to be what you make of them. And to everyone who survived Match Day 2023, I wish you all my best. Thanks again for listening.